it makes sense except for the fact that every single one of us is going to die anyway. So to be fundamentally controlled by a fear of something that is actually going to happen, like nothing is going to stop this train from getting off at the death exit, like nothing is. But so I think that a part of, on top of accepting your belonging, accepting the inevitability of death so that you can make the most of life.
You're tuned in to Compassionate Las Vegas, the podcast, where compassion inspires action. Together, we're building a world centered in understanding, empathy, and courageous action, starting right here in the heart of Southern Nevada. We're taking the principle of do unto others as you would have them do unto you to heart. Now, let's welcome a man committed to fostering compassion in every corner of our city, a beacon of compassion in Las Vegas, your host, Will Rucker.
Welcome to Compassionate Las Vegas, the podcast. I'm Will Rucker, and I am absolutely thrilled that you have joined us for today's program. Joining me is a recent longtime friend. We've spent a lot of time together through some trainings and just stayed in touch because he's just a genuinely good person. And we have so much in common in our backgrounds. I thought you'd get a lot out of what he has to share. So without further ado, let's welcome to the podcast, Pedro Silva. Hello and welcome.
Hey, man, good to be up here with you. Good to see you.
Well, I am so glad we got to connect and get this on your busy calendar because you've got a lot going on and you're in a transitional space, as are many people. And so I really want to just have a conversation and let the world in on you and I catching up.
Okay. Oh, that sounds awesome.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, the way I start every podcast is with setting the foundation, and that's with a definition. And it's the definition of compassion. And I want to hear what you define it as and how you came to that.
When I think of compassion, what immediately comes to mind is Da, which is big love, which is a way of saying compassion in Chinese. And that comes to me because when I was in my early 20s, I went to the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California, and I was studying Mandarin. And during that season, there was an earthquake in Taiwan, and I offered to volunteer to help raise money for it. And I didn't know what I was getting myself into, but it turned out I was the only Black person with many hundreds of Chinese people volunteering. I was the only non-Chinese person. And when I got there, at first I thought, okay, this is, I've been the only Black person plenty of times with white people, but never the only Black person with Chinese people, and the only Black person with Mexican people, but never the only Black person with Chinese people. And especially most of them were speaking Mandarin. And somewhere in that space, they talked a lot about Da, which is big love, which is compassion. And at some point, when I first got there, some people didn't realize that I was studying Mandarin, so they said some things in front of me that they probably wouldn't have said if they knew I could understand them. And then when I let them know I could understand them, there was some little bit of embarrassment there. And then there was this recognition. And then we connected to our mission, like why we were there, what was our purpose? And it was to try to raise money for the victims of the earthquake in Taiwan. And when we got to that place of understanding the mutual reason why we were together, it transcended our differences and brought us into the place of big love, which is compassion. So whenever I hear the word compassion, I automatically think Da, and I automatically think, which again translates as big love. And I think that that's what we're called to in our lives, is to big and ever growing love. So to me, that's compassion.
And I love that big love. I mean, for me, love and compassion are really two sides of the same coin, or even the same side of the same coin. Turner has a song called "We Don't Need Another Hero." And I always quote the line, love and compassion, their day is coming.
Mhm.
And I believe their day is here. And I love
Mhm.
hearing that story. I also say that compassion helps us to see one another and to see
Mhm.
things more clearly. So in that circumstance, you were actually able to build a bridge through language, and folks were like, "Oh, we have something in common," and it kind
Mhm.
of transformed how that relationship played out. So I love your definition. Just so that we also understand kind of your background and what brought you to this moment in life. I know in the past you were a pastor, Christian
Mhm.
pastor. You've done so many work with the Unify Project and I mean, music. So
Mhm.
just share 90,000 foot view a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I like to say that the thing that every piece of work I've ever done has been, the thing that the thread that goes through all of it is, people and relationships, and ever growing into that. And in the course of growing into deeper relationships, I started out, I guess I've done a lot of things, but the first thing that I would say is significant is when I went into the Air Force. And a part of my desire to go to the Air Force was to be a part of something bigger than myself, and to serve. I met some folks in the Air Force when I was volunteering at a homeless shelter. And so I was like, "Whoa, well, these guys are volunteering at a homeless shelter." And at the time I was just working in a McDonald's and a hardware store and a Mexican restaurant. And I said, "Well, shoot, maybe I'll join the Air Force, have one job instead of three jobs." And since they seem to support volunteerism, and I was already volunteering anyway, I thought, wow, this is pretty cool. And so I entered in, um, through that channel of expanding relationships and trying to be a part of something bigger than myself. And then it just kept shifting over time. I shifted from my original career field of satellite communications, and then moved into linguistics, and intelligence, which then added another dimension of relationships because I started studying Mandarin, and all of a sudden, a world of a billion plus people that I would have never had any, relational depth with was opened up to me as I started to understand the culture and the language and other elements of how, they see the world, not, generally speaking. And through that, it made the world even bigger for me. It's so big, in fact, that I could not be in the military anymore because I started to, be too curious, let's say, about other people's worldviews. Because once I could see some of the world from their perspective, I was like, how many other perspectives do I not see that are shaping how people show up in the world, that I didn't feel qualified to say that the way I was looking at the world was the way to look at the world. And at the time, I was, a pretty conservative fundamentalist, Christian. And so that expanded me. And then from there, I became a corporate recruiter, after I got out of the military. And when I did that, it showed me more of, you talk to every type of person when you're a recruiter. And I tried to be effective, so I always tried to learn as much as I could about the people. They came from different cultures and different backgrounds, and all those things just kept adding to, uh, the my desire to relate to people and love people. And out of that corporate recruiting in 2008, there was like a, you know housing crisis and a lot of people losing their jobs, and I saw how empty so many people felt. That when they lost their jobs, they felt like they lost their very identity. And then out of that, because I had changed career fields and done so many different things, I knew that my identity wasn't wrapped up in what I did because I had done a lot of things already at that point. And so I had this desire to help people bring more of themselves to work, to bring more of themselves to whatever situation they found themselves in, and to see themselves as a gift and a treasure to every moment that they were in. And it just deeply burdened my soul that so many people, especially men, were seeing themselves as, without my job, I'm nothing. And I was like, it just really hit me like, wow, that's how people see themselves. And then couple that with the DEI stuff I was doing. And I was also doing, some like diversity recruiting. So I just, all those things came together and I said, man, there's got to be a way to help people, live more fully into who they are and to recognize themselves as a gift and a treasure to the world. And so I ended up stumbling into seminary, um, but I hadn't intentionally wanted to be a pastor. when I was younger, I did, but then I stopped thinking that. What I thought I was going to do was to learn how to spread the good news of people's um, beingness and the value and all the things that we could contribute if we just, you know, learn to value ourselves and to bring that into the DEI and the corporate recruiting space. And so, but I ended up sticking through seminary, making it through, graduating, went back to corporate recruiting, and then didn't plan on being a pastor. And so happened I stumbled into this church that I wasn't even planning on going to. I was going to go to another church, but that service had started. So I went into this other church whose service hadn't started yet. And this is after I finished seminary, done all my internships, and was qualified to be a pastor. I stumbled in this church, and 2 weeks later, two of their pastors resigned, and they heard, all they knew was my first name and that I had gone to seminary. And they looked me up online, and it so happened that I was the, I guess you would call it the valedictorian of my seminary class. Like I did the
It's a
commencement
small
speech.
accomplishment.
Yeah. So when they went to the website of the seminary, they saw me on the front of it, and given this commencement address. And so they reached out to me and said, "Hey, would you be interested in being a pastor for a year and help us through this transition?" And it so happened to be in the one place my wife wanted to live. And I was like, well, look at that. Look at God, whatever it is. So I ended up being a pastor for 6.5 years, which expanded in another group that I had never really been around, which was liberal, progressive, white, what do you call it, resourced people, like in a large degree in Boulder, Colorado. And I was like, whoa, man, God is always plopping me in these places with mass groups of people that are different than me, that have different worldviews than me and different backgrounds than me. So I learned what I had to learn for that 6.5 years, and I hope they learned whatever they had to learn, because I brought myself to that space. And then after that, I entered into the bridging movement, which is, again, about people and trying to bring people together across differences, to be able to solve problems that are solvable when we don't fear each other and when we aren't in the position of thinking that somebody else's narrative is somehow in competition with our narrative, to the degree that we become canceled, which we can talk about that later. But emotionally and psychically canceled just by another person's very existence. That's what we feel, because our love isn't big enough. Our compassion isn't big enough that we can see other people emerging into their being alongside us with different histories and different worldviews and different perspectives, but there's still love big enough to contain it all. But we haven't gotten there yet. I mean, some places, but we haven't gotten there yet. Sorry for the long answer, but that's the trajectory.
No, I mean, it's depth, and it just kind of, I think, demonstrates why this conversation is important for people to listen to, because you do have such a wide range of experiences with so many different people. And I'll say, in spite of those experiences, you are still seeking unity and bringing people together.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, our world is polarized. I wish I could say it was just our country, but
Yeah.
all across the globe, people are really trying to find their place and trying to figure out what what the heck we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the answer to it really is that big love,
Mm-hmm.
and the experience of being uncomfortable, I think,
Mm-hmm.
stretches us in a way that allows us the capacity to embrace the fullness of who we actually are, which, again, in
Mm-hmm.
my belief system, is love. So you mentioned something in there that I want to dive a bit more into, which is, now I guess it's kind of a bad word in some spaces, but DEI,
Mm-hmm.
diversity, equity, and inclusion. And in some spaces that includes justice or belonging, or
Mm-hmm.
you name it. There are a bunch of letters that people add. But if you would just share a little bit of why diversity is important, and also if you feel as though it's beneficial.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I'll say is diversity is reality. Like there's nothing. If you went into the grocery store and you said, what do you have for fruit? And they said apples, and that was it. What do you have for sodas? Pepsi Clear. Remember that Pepsi Clear from
Oh
like
my gosh, yeah.
all we have is one soda. All we have is one piece of fruit. All we have is one kind of meat. I mean, we would go crazy. You open up a coloring box of crayons, a box of crayons, and got 50 different shades of purple. I mean, this is reality, and um, and I think there's a saying it's like a variety is the spice of life, and
Yep.
it is that. So we crave diversity, even though we tend to fear it. I have a theory that the people who oppose how they experience DEI, they are the type of people, as I said earlier, who feel like another person's narrative is in competition with their own and somehow negates or cancels theirs. And I believe that at the deepest level, what people are saying is they want to belong. And so the people who resist DEI, they think that DEI is a threat to their belonging because they have found their sense of belonging in a narrative that tells them, this is what is normative. This is what is acceptable. This is how, you make it in the world. And they may have been born into circumstances that either aligned with or they over time chose to align with this narrative. And so anything else that seems different is just like, it's competition. You got to get away from me because how will I belong if you belong too? So I think that that's where it's coming from. And a lot of the people who are proponents of DEI, corporate DEI and such, they unfortunately have also subscribed to this limited idea of who can belong. And so they think, well, if we don't assert ourselves in our belonging, we will be relegated to the back corner like we have been historically. The only way that we can express and exercise our right to belong is in the same way that our reality had been resisted in the past. So then they come with the same force. And a lot of people, I mean, this is interesting about humans, but people don't like it when people match their energy. So if they see some people who are proponents for DEI coming out aggressively, they'll say, oh, I don't like that energy, get out of here. So I think that we have the challenge of learning how to communicate power in a way that is power with, not power over. And the problem is that we have been practicing power over for so long in our society that any person who wants to stand their ground, not any person, very many people who want to stand their ground think they have to do it in the power over kind of way.
I'm seeing this and deviating from the original question just a bit, but same ballpark.
Right.
What I'm seeing is a lot of people want a change in power, not a change in paradigm. And I don't think
Hmm.
that it's a conscious choice. Like they're saying they want equality or equity, they want belonging and diversity. And when you look at it in practice, it really is just shifting the power structure from one dominant culture to another. What are
Right.
your thoughts on that? And how do we create this paradigm shift to universal belonging?
I mean, I'll start with the how do we, create the paradigm shift of universal belonging. And I actually just made a video about this. It becomes with accepting that your belonging is not in question. Like by God's graces, the way I express it, have felt like my belonging has never been in question since I've been on the earth. Like I was like, I'm here. You know, everything in the universe must have agreed to me. God must have agreed to me because I'm here. At the same time, since I've been here, people have told me you don't have the right to exist. Like you shouldn't be you for a lot of reasons. Like you're a black dude, you have a single mom, you're poor, you're, whatever, short, if I didn't already say that. The different criteria that told me that my value had to be diminished to the degree that I didn't have adjacency to the normative notion of what a powerful human being could and should be. I've gotten most of those things checked off. You've been abused, like all these things that told me I should be less. But I always give the credit to God because it's not like I did it on my own, but somehow I uh, chose to ignore those narratives that try to diminish me. But most of us can't ignore that. Most of us um, come into the world, and it's like you get here and they say, okay, here's your script, here's your script, here's your script. Now play out this role and everything will be all right. And most of us fall in line with it, even when the roles we've been handed are self-deprecating and diminishing. I don't participate in that, but I observe that most of us do, right? So if you come from a place of my belonging is not in question, then you don't have to ask permission to belong. People who choose to be in relationship with you, eventually, either they have to disappear out of your life or they have to align with your reality of your own belonging. So I would say that that's the first thing to shift the paradigm inside of yourself. That's what I work with my kids. Is like work with that inside of yourself. Your belonging is not in question. If you find yourself questioning your belonging, you're wrong, you know, and it's okay to be wrong about that. You exist, you belong. That's fundamental to everything. So that's how I roll, you know. And then outside of that, I think in terms of like coming back to the kind of like DEI situation and the power over and those kinds of dynamics. I mean, I would say that power in the mindset that we're living in right now is really about the power over who lives and who dies. And it might not be an instantaneous who lives and who dies, but along the span of life. And so like America is the most powerful nation, largely because we have the capacity to destroy the earth in a half an hour. And that is our power over, and we wield it. You know, we don't have to say it. We wield it in a lot of different ways. You know, we do things like we make movies, and in the movies they'll say, "Oh no, this bad guy got their hands on the codes, and if they access our weaponry, they could create mass annihilation." And then we watch the movie like, "Oh my God," and they have the technology to do it, and they're like, "Oh no." But what that movie is subtly communicating is America has the power to destroy anything if we wanted to. And we have impossible heroes that even if somebody tried to take it over, we would get it back. And one guy, one magical, super powerful white dude will be able to, or sometimes Denzel Washington will be able to stop it all. You know, so we're communicating a narrative, and we have the big stick. And so that kind of unconsciously runs a dynamic inside of our minds. Like the thought of who has the power over whether I live or die is something that is consciously running underneath. And even these programs like DEI and stuff like that, people don't think about it. But what people experience, the people who are in opposition to it, they think, oh, if more people of color, let's just say, for example, because people always think DEI is just about people of color. So people of color start getting these jobs, then I may not be able to provide for my family, which means I'll probably die. So DEI is trying to kill me. And that's how they experience it, you know? And then they're like, I'm not going to die. And they get into the resistance of it. Or say it's a Black person who's opposed to DEI, but or any person in a certain marginalized category, and they're opposed to it. But a part of their opposition is white people, let's say, that they have that paradigm in their mind that white people have the power. That like, you know, people believe that. So I'm not going to act like we don't. White people have the power. If they have the power where I live and die, then I need to align myself with them because I don't want to die. I want to be able to take care of my family. You know, so it keeps coming down to that fundamental fear that someone has the power over our life or our death, and that whatever we do, we have to align to be able to survive. That's like a fundamental human fear. And it makes sense, except for the fact that every single one of us is going to die anyway. So to be fundamentally controlled by a fear of something that is actually going to happen, like nothing is going to stop this train from getting off at the death exit. Like nothing is. But so I think that a part of, on top of accepting your belonging, accepting the inevitability of death so that you can make the most of life is another way of being able to live into this. And then things like DEI or different programs that actually would expand. If we can work together, we actually would make it that we would have more life, more thriving, more abundance, and all these other things. But we just got to shift that paradigm because right now we see these things as a threat.
Unfortunately, time has just flown by, and
I talk too
this
much.
program is no, you are perfect. But I will ask, will you stick around to do a second episode with this?
Yes, for sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Pedro. This was fantastic. And thank you for tuning in to Compassionate Las Vegas, the podcast. I'm Will Rucker. And as I always remind you, you are not just a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop. And what you do matters. So live compassionately. I'll see you next time.